So Jesus wasn't God. Mostly because he wasn't real. We got another coward here. Neil Young is a coward. Can't even put up his real picture. But he'll pray. I reject your prayers. I don't want any prayers. You cannot put your intention on me, you witch. Keep your damn prayers off of me. And if you had any guts, you'd pick up the phone and make a call. Jesus went to the cross for you, and you can't even pick up a phone for him. What's wrong with you? When the time is right in the agenda, they will say that if you're in the woods with a naked boy, that's what would Jesus do? And the answer will be Jesus would do him. Just Frank. Oh, wow. Okay. So then comes Jesus to a place called Gethsemane. And am I the only one that thinks that says, get the semen in me? I'm just saying. Get the semen in me. But anyway, so he comes to Gethsemane. Says to the disciples, y'all sit here. But he took the little boy with him. You disciples, wait out here. Why would you tell your disciples to wait outside while you took the little boy deeper into the garden so you could have a little one-on-one time? I'm sure they were just going to lay hands on each other. I'm sure they were just going to maybe receive communion. I'm sure the little boy was just going to eat of his flesh and drink of his blood. I'm sure that's all it was. I'm sure that's all it was. But he says, y'all stay there. Me and this little boy, we're going to go deeper into the bushes. And he took Peter and he took the two sons of Zebedee. And then he says to them, you wait here. He's setting up two defensive perimeters. One perimeter, 9 apostles stay at. If you see them coming, go, caw-caw, caw-caw. And then he goes a little bit further. Jesus, the little boy. Why are you Christians such cowards? Pick up the phone. Are you that afraid of me? No, you're that afraid that you don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, 9 apostles are the first perimeter of defense. And Jesus said, if you see them coming, caw-caw, caw-caw. And then he leaves Peter, James, and John and says, if you see them coming, go, whoop-a-woo, whoop-a-woo. So if Jesus was involved in some kind of stuff that he didn't want nobody to see, he could be involved in that stuff and he could hear, caw-caw, caw-caw. So he knew that maybe he could finish up what he was doing, but if he heard, whoop-a-woo, whoop-a-woo, then he knew that it was time to really, break it off. And so he's got two perimeters of defense. Then he went a little further and he fell on his face. I'm not even going to touch that one. I'm not even going to touch that one, but I am going to go over here and I am going to, somebody, for some reason she's not showing up, somebody time out JC, and if she says another word like that, just ban her from the channel. Thank you. Thank you very much. So Jesus goes face down. I'm not even going to touch that one. I'm going to leave that one alone. Jesus goes face down. And he's praying, right? He's praying. And then he goes back and checks. Did you see anybody coming? Nope, didn't see anybody coming. So he goes back, and whatever he was doing it so long that the damn disciples had fallen asleep. It's a call-in show, not a write-in show. Thank you, Mind Over Magic. Right? But somebody must have given him the caw-caw. And this one must have given him the whoop-a-woo, whoop-a-woo. because he came out, right? He came out. And he came out just as this great multitude with swords and staves was coming from the chief priests and the people. And Judas comes up and gives Jesus a smooch. Okay, that's a little gay, but we're going to just go right past that because that's not what we're here to talk about. That's not what we're here to talk about. And then we hear about all this, then we hear about all that. But where do we hear about the part? Where's the part about the kid the kid that was naked? The kid ran away naked. Where is that? Where do we get to that? Take the sword. The disciples forsook him and fled. They that had laid hold on Jesus led him away when the scribes and priests were assembled. Then the chief priests and the elders, the high priest, they said, nevertheless. Then the priest rent his clothes. And then this fellow was with Jesus. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. Then he went and he wept bitterly. Is it in the beginning of the next verse, next chapter, 27? Then the morning was come. Crap. So what you got to do is you're going to find out about, if you want to find out, you can't find the word you're looking for, where, let's just look up naked. Naked. There's a lot of nakedness in the Bible, so we'll go New Testament, naked. And we'll say, naked and you clothed me. Naked. I was a stranger, I was naked. Matthew, when do we see you a stranger and you were naked? Come on. And they said, we'll reply naked. And the young man had been following. Oh, here it is. Now watch this. Watch this. One young man, some young guy, you had 12 men, 12 grown men with a little boy in the woods. Totally normal. Totally normal. So, but watch this. One young man, right? Let's break this down. One young. What does young mean? Oh, he wasn't just a young man. So you got to look at these words. This is why they don't want you to read the Bible. Because just reading it, you might read this and say, oh, okay. But when you actually read it in the original language like this, because this is what you do. Watch this. You just want to read. You read, okay, I'm reading. But then you go where it's all blue like this. Oh, one young man. Okay, let's go to interlinear and see what it really says. Because it gives you the Greek up here, and it gives you the straight English here. So, a young man. Okay, what is a young man? A young man is a attendant. Oh.
Oh, buddy. Woo! Diggity dang dong. Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer, you have really crossed the line now. I mean, what? Now, I know that some of you are thinking, now, Dave, Brother Bose, just let it be. Leave him alone. Ain't nothing good gonna come from talking about this guy or debating him or whatever. Well, no, I'm not going to debate him. He came on and he begged me to debate him, and I said, okay, I agree. And then he said, I ain't going to debate you. And then he said, hey, how come you're a coward? So I thought you said, so we did all that. And I don't want to talk about that anymore. But he's still focusing on me on his channel. And it's just getting really raunchy over there. And so why do I care? Because there have been individuals that I'm finding out that are like some of his subs or something, and they're viciously attacking me. And again, I'm not worried about that. And I was trying to actually make a video the last couple of times. I think I was trying to, in a way, say something. I thought maybe he'd listen. Because he was on my channel. He was in the comments, just coming at me like you wouldn't believe. And I thought, well, maybe he's listening to some of the videos, and and it's upsetting him. But if he listens, maybe he'll change his mind. I mean, some of you say, well, I don't care what he does. It's his business. I care because I think I'm trying to persuade him. I'm hoping that he is a good person somewhere inside, if he is, then no matter how much of these lies that he's trying to use to excuse what he's been doing, I suppose he's been doing it long enough to where he's got a vendetta now. He's trying to prove. I mean, I understand how a person would think that the Bible is just a bunch of lies and people are being drawn into some fake reality and they're being brainwashed. But what I'm trying to share with him, because I happen to know that that's not true. I happen to know that it isn't just the Bible. It's the entire astrological great wisdom, the great science, the mysteries that were studied in the mystery schools and all the ancient temples and written upon the temple walls and the pyramids and in the stars. And I know it's the same message. I know that there's something about this message. I investigated it. And I know that, some people would think, well, the Bible's written by some guy or whatever, or Rome, and we don't trust Rome. I wouldn't trust Rome, right? Would you trust Rome? I don't know. Well, who is Rome? This is what I'm trying to show people. There is a royal bloodline. What is this royal bloodline? What is this story about Judah and Joseph and these promises? What is this story of creation that's in the Sumerian tablets, the Babylonian, the Akkadian, the Egyptian, the Mayan? What is this Olympus with the 12 gods? What is all of this information? We can't just say, oh, it was all made up by the Romans. And when we find out who Caesar really was, what he really did, who Lazarus, this rich man, really is, and how he gave all of his wealth at the apostles' feet. When we find out the story of Peter Valdez or Peter Waldo and the Great Inquisition and why these people, whoever they were trying so desperately to kill these people and destroy the scriptures so that they keep, they had this whole priesthood called the Masoretic scribe, these Talmud Judeans that come along and falsify. I mean, they couldn't just rewrite the Bible and lie and say, it didn't exist, because everybody wanted one. Everybody knew it was in everybody's hearts. They were already converted. So what they had to do was, all the way along the line, people were hearing about the message. The apostles spread it all around through the world. There were schools that were teaching these mysteries. They couldn't stamp it out. They would murder them and kill them, but they couldn't stamp it out. And it wasn't like they could just burn the book. Each one of these groups had books. And in, maybe in 325, they came together and started a canon, decide which ones they would agree with and which ones they wouldn't. And yes, I do believe that was a bad deal, that council at Nicaea, that Constantine, who came along and said, we'll conquer in the name of this Red Cross, then sailed all over the world and massacred the world. You see, if we're interested in the truth, if we're trying to get down to the bottom of the barrel and find out what's the source of this spring, we'll find out that this guy named Jesus, you like him or not, was real. He's in all the history books, the Talmud, Josephus, Plutarch, Pliny, all the church fathers who were all historians, so to speak, anyway. They were very much like historians. They were members of the mystery schools. Some of them were bishops or the presiding overseer, I guess, or whatever, of these local groups, mystery schools. I mean, if you lived in Ephesus, there had to be a school there, right? And these were ancient schools. Not like there was just a new one popped up, right? It didn't have anything to do with the other one. They all argued amongst themselves about the mysteries. The Stoics weren't like completely different than the Platonists. So they were all arguing, the Gnostics, whoever, they were all arguing about these same ancient mysteries. And when Christ came along, they said, hey, we all know the Christ is going to come. It wasn't like nobody, disagreed. It's real. It's in all the history books. The peasants as well as the elite, the kings, they knew he was coming. And these are true documented testimonies in the scriptures about kings and queens, like Sergius Paulus of Cyprus, or Cornelius, or Pilate, who, by the way, left documentation of Jesus Christ. Pilate, who washed his hands and said, I find no thing wrong with this man. This is a real occurrence. We have the book of Pilate, a letter written to Rome that proves. We've gone over these proofs. But what were they arguing? They were saying, well, we know the Christ is coming, but the only difference is that the Judeans did not believe Jesus was their Christ, their Messiah. They didn't like him because he didn't teach what they thought or expected from their Messiah, because they were following Yahweh and they couldn't understand these mysteries. And there were others, far more other mysteries, right? Up in Artemis and Dionysius and Eleusis and the priesthood in Egypt, Solon, Thales, that Pythagoras learned the mysteries. He went to Persia and learned the Zoroastrian mysteries. It's a fool who would say that these mysteries were stupid. People were going to these mysteries to learn a secret. Now, maybe, just maybe, and I'm only asking you to investigate, guys. Take a look, and see if this is true. But for thousands of years, people understood there was a thing called the mysteries. It was not told to the public. And one of the things you had to do was give all that you owned to these people. And join, that's why we got these things called monasteries. And people would go and give all their wealth and live a life of poverty, or like the Ebionites, which means poor. Why would anybody do this? Are they a bunch of fools? No, they understood these mysteries were eternal life. That if they could learn these mysteries, what were they? They were the secret of life. That this was all a delusion, illusions. Buddha, yes. Shintoism, yes. Brahmanism, Hinduism, all of these teachings are all the same. It was, we had to give up, like Lazarus, who came to Jesus and said, what do I do to have eternal life? If Jeffrey Dahmer thinks that is a foolish question, how do I gain eternal life? That's not foolish. Don't mock the master, oh grasshopper. You're ignorant. You're a fool. You'll never conquer this world with that sword, or with your smirk, or with your arrogance. Jesus said, go and learn what these things mean, to the Pharisees who didn't understand the scriptures nor the power of the divine being. Yeah, they had their beliefs, their opinions, just like Jeffrey Dahmer, right? That I've debated. Their opinions are, well, it's all a bunch of crap, right? These pyramids, oh yeah, 20, 30-ton stones stacked on top of each other. What a miracle. Oh, it was probably aliens, right? We've proven that because the Bavarians have come out and told us that they were abducted. And so now we know how this all happened, this mystery. How did we come alive? How did we get here, David? Well, it's simple. Darwin, the atheist, told us. You see, we evolved from a pollywog. Well, where did the pollywog come from? Well, the pollywog came from an amebio or something, a little, some sort of acid or something, chemicals. Where did the chemicals come from? Where did existence come from? Where did this physical matter come from? Well, it came out of a big bang. Okay, it was a big bang. Where was the source of the bang? Well, it's a physical, chemical, result of neurons and explosions. And okay, but what is causing materiality? What is causing this universe? The answer, according to the mysteries, was mind. That the physical mysteries are a delusion and a product of the mind, and that the suffering that we're experiencing is the fear and the doubt and the lies and the hate, this lower nature of fear, this delusion. that we got to get out of this world by abstaining from it. What amazing truth the great masters taught. But the fools said no. Nay. But even those who were studying the mysteries knew that it was just philosophy until or unless there actually you could demonstrate the demonstration of the power of the Holy Spirit, and that people's lives could be changed, and the sick would be made well, the lame would walk, and the blind would see. And this is what Jesus came to show us, that these mysteries were real. People have been trying to learn the mysteries, but it's a difficult thing. Yes, we were evolving, transmigrating, growing from glory into glory, even as it's done by the Lord. Yes, there was a certain kind of karma, and yes, there was a lots of mysteries that people understood in that kind of mysterious way. But what no one could have done, what no one had done, not even Alexander the Great, because obviously if he had learned the truth, he would have taken his magic wand and made peace all over the world. But instead he went out and started battling the enemy with a sword, because he didn't know any other way. He studied at the feet of Aristotle. Aristotle was a great philosopher who learned from Pythagoras, who learned from Thales and so on, who learned from the Egyptian priesthood and Zoroastrian and the Indian priesthood. But evidently they couldn't quite, they learned how, they knew how. They had to give up all their wealth and follow the Lord, but they didn't quite grasp it yet. It was a revelation that one had to have. Peter got the revelation, you see, we find in the New Testament, because his eye became opened when he recognized Christ and who he was, when he got that revelation, because Jesus came to give us that revelation. To mock the revelation of Jesus Christ, the culmination and fulfillment of all the ancient prophecies and the message and the truth that was in the stars, and the goal to which all these adepts had been working in their temples and doing their rituals and their ceremonies, and looking at the dramas and trying to understand. And the best of the best, when Jesus came, they walked up to Jesus and said, "Oh Lord, you think you're so wonderful. You went to all these schools and these mysteries. We've been there and we get it. It makes sense, but I'm still not quite getting it. Lord, how can we gain eternal life?" Jesus said, "You got to give up everything you got and come follow me." And they're like, "Oh, that's hard. I don't want to give up all my wealth. I'm a king. I'll die a poor man out in the desert. What are you talking? Oh, I don't understand." This is such a mystery, because it required faith and it required the whole truth. It required a little secret to be known. That little secret, the final secret that no one, even John the Baptist, who was the head of the Essenes, the priests that were worshiping at the temple of Artemis and Dionysius, they were still, John the Baptist's disciples, they were still looking for the one to come who would give them the absolute final capstone of this truth. They had the mysteries, but they didn't have the truth. They had parables, and there were many wise men, and there were, from time to time, individuals like Buddha or Elihu, who was transferred right into heaven, and he gave these mysteries before he left. His mantle fell down on Elisha, and Elisha went and started the Lycaonian mysteries. And therefore other people came, students, and they would come. But you see, up to that point, very few, Enoch and Elihu and Buddha and certain ones, Krishna, came. Dionysius, who was Elisha. But the majority of people were still groping in the dark that they might find the truth. Though he's not far from any one of us, the Bible says. And when they saw the Lord, they said, "Are you the one?" He said, "Well, go tell John that the dead are being brought to life, and the blind are seeing, and the lame are walking." All right, we got to demonstrate this. We're not playing around here. We don't need no mockers, Mr. Dahmer. Because, you can laugh and mock these great, amazing truths and say they were all made up by the Romans, but these are the ancient teachings of Hindu and Egyptian and Babylonian and Sumerian and Mayan priests all over the world going back thousands of years, written in the stars, and you mock them, you're a fool. Or you're just very ignorant. And if that's the case, you're just ignorant and you don't know any better, then I am going to go ahead and try again to help you. Because even if you don't understand this, Jeffrey, maybe some of your subs who have been deceived by your message, maybe this lady Purple who's been harassing me and trying to get me to join her church, will finally wake up and understand that these are true mysteries that need to be understood properly and not by some yahoo who just decided to make a YouTube channel and mock the Lord that somehow or another, that's all, it's all crap. It's all ridiculous. You see, here's the problem. He's blaming Christians for all the evil that's in the world. And I've said that it wasn't our fault. They killed us. We were trying to love people. And the devil didn't like that. Spreading all the love and opening people's eyes and making them free from this bondage in this world. He didn't like that because he wants to keep you in bondage. So who was Caesar fighting? Because we just said Caesar is a great, great man who gave all of his wealth and became the first knight to protect the Holy Grail and the Lord Mary Magdalene, and took her to Marseille, France. And from there, the knights began to make the temples and went to Avalon and into America. And there's this thing called the Constitution and Liberty and Justice for All. And it's the hope of all men. The coming kingdom. So who was this Caesar? Well, he was just some ruthless, it's like Alexander the Great. He was out there killing people, Dave. Alexander the Great studied the mysteries, but evidently he didn't get it, did he? But he knew that there was going to come one from his seed. It was prophesied because Alexander the Great came from the same lineage of Judah, from Zerah, and this brought forth the Zerah or Caesars, or the Khazars, or the Caesar, Khazar, Caesar. It's all the same, this royal bloodline that was not of Judea, but a different line from Judah, not from the Perez, but a line that was just as equally from Judah. I know the other line, would eventually have this law possessed of Satan, Judas, who betrayed the Lord. But what about Nebuchadnezzar? Well, he was also from Solomon, a line of the Czars, the Caesars, from Judah. Yeah, there are other royal bloodlines. And Daniel was also from Judah, the tribe of Judah. And one of his, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the storybooks, one of those individuals was called Belteshazzar. They were kings. They were from Judah. They were of royal bloodlines. And why were there three of these wise men? Because they went bloodlines that went into various kingdoms, Persia and India and Samaria, or wherever Assyria, these different areas, they all had these royal bloodlines. And there was one that went up to Troy that became this great general, Alexander the Great, and he had these children, and they divided up the world between the children. So it happens over and over again. Cleopatra had daughters that she spent time raising and sending them to the mystery schools, just like Alexander did, and they were taken and married off to the different kings of the world. So then, why didn't it work, Dave? We're still fighting. Caesar comes along, and he's murdering and having all these battles, right? Up in Gaul. Who was he fighting? And why was he fighting if he was a good person? Because you see, he hadn't figured out this is a spiritual battle. He hadn't understood you had to give up all your wealth and follow the Lord. He hadn't sat down and like Liu on the mountain and waited and waited and waited. He got deceived by the material world. We all do. We all have to learn the things that, by the things that we suffered. Sometimes it takes a lifetime of suffering, but if we have a good heart, we'll find it. And Caesar was a good person, and we can read that in the history books. He was making libraries for the people. He would take this money that he would get in the battles and the taxes that people were giving to the empire, and they would build roads, and they built libraries, and he allowed the mystery schools in all of the lands where he went. He allowed them to learn the mysteries, hoping that someone would be the heir, someone would come along, the promised one, who would learn the final thing, who would be the son of the divine being, the real one, chosen by the Heavenly Father. And when the angel or the star fell and every nation recorded it, they knew that child, that all the wise men came, told Caesar, look, that child, your wife Cleopatra, she had a child, and you better protect that child because that is the one. We found him. He's written about in all the mysteries. The Judeans got him in their prophecies, right? And all the prophets. Who are these prophets that we have in this Bible? Well, they're not prophets of Yahweh. They're prophets of El, as we've been saying. And these prophets are people like Buddha. Ezekiel was a son of Buddha. Calls him Boozy in your translations. But he's from the very city that Buddha was. And it existed at the very moment and very time that Buddha existed, about 600 BC. These prophets, like I said, Elisha was Dionysus, up there in Greek, up there in Syria, I should say. So the Bible is the Reader's Digest version of all the esoteric wisdom. It's talking about all the world, not just Judeans. They're just put on a pedestal as an example of what not to do. They're that wicked deity who says, I am God and there is none else, and taught their hands for warfare. Even David was persuaded to go the way of the flesh. He was a good person, but he went out and used his actual physical sword. And we have to learn it's not about the physical. So if Caesar was a good person and he was out there warring and battling, right, and bringing all this taxation from all around the world, well, that's terrible, taxing the people. No, he did it fairly. He gave them roads for their taxes and schools and libraries, and he wasn't trying to rob them like the Senate was trying to do. This is why he did everything he could to take that Senate, their power, away from them, because there were some bad people in the Senate, just like there is today, and they're trying to deceive and murder the prophets and take away the mystery schools so that nobody can learn these mysteries. If you have the schools and you teach the truth and you have good education, then maybe somebody will come along and learn the truth and write a book, and the world will be educated and will go towards truth and light. But you see, what happened is the devil was down here murdering. And so, in Caesar's mind, he's like, well, we got to get rid of these guys so that our children can learn truth. Like a lot of people today, maybe they think, well, the devil's wrecking havoc in our society and they're murdering us, so then we should go out and do the same to them, right? We got to stand up and fight, right? Even in the Constitution, we had the right to bear arms, because even then we didn't realize this was a spiritual battle. See, this great revelation was revealed by Jesus, and very few people understood it. And it started with Caesar. You have to understand that Caesar did no wrong, no evil, by defending the empire and the people that he was there to protect. And King David did no wrong defending the empire and going and getting the Ark of the Covenant. And yes, I think it's quite hilarious. It's hilarious that we have been deceived to this point. Jesus came and said, turn the other cheek. Why? Because defending yourself would be wrong? Absolutely not. But because we must be wiser than serpents and as innocent as doves. Because the only way to defeat them is to do this as a spiritual battle. It's the battle for the mind. Forget this material world that's an illusion, a delusion. It was the heart of David that mattered. He didn't kill anybody people point to the fact that he killed Uriah. That was a giant. And, that Bathsheba was a very powerful woman. The daughter of the Queen of Sheba. And they had been taken over by these Nephilims. And it was a battle for the physical world. And at that time, that was the only battle they understood or they perceived that they had an option to pursue. Because they hadn't grasped the great wisdom. They hadn't evolved to that point and become adepts and found the mystery, which wasn't destined to come until Christ. And Christ taught us, no, you guys, that's futile. Peter, you're not a bad person, but you know what? Put your sword away because, listen, there's a better way. We're going to actually have to do something that's going to win the war. We're going to have to use love. We're going to have a spiritual battle and win that one first. And in our day, I believe that the document that we had was the best document for our evolutionary progress at the time and is a blueprint for the coming millennium. The pursuit of justice and righteousness and liberty and all of that. And she'll make no law that will restrict my freedom and all of that. And rights. And yet we have the right to defend ourselves. That's still one of our rights. There won't be, ever in a time in history where you don't have the right to defend yourself. It's just that we're going to use the education and the love and the goodness to share with people that this kind of evil where we have to defend ourselves from should be so rare. And there should be so many righteous people walking around in love that they would never think of doing anything like that. It would be something that would be the last resort. Even the church in the days of Paul said, hand such a one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit might be saved in the day of the Lord. Yeah, hand him over to the government, to the devil. Let them take care of him and let the law, that's why the apostle said that the law was made for those who, are wrong and pay Caesar's things to Caesar and all of that. Because technically that's what the law is. That's what the whole, whatever government we might have. I mean, we'll come to a place where we're governed over by love and that's it. But we hadn't reached that point yet. So Caesar was a good man. And the reason he was battling up there was to help people. Well, who was he fighting? He was fighting the people from Sweden. He was fighting Dan. See, if you do some research, it's very difficult to really grasp who all these people were in Europe. You got the Celts that they claim was there from about they came to the 14th century. Well, that means around 1300 BC. When is that? That's when Moses took the children of Israel out of Egypt. So before Moses took the children of out of Egypt, there was another exodus from Zerah. They were the Tuatha-De-Danans, and they went to Ireland, and they were the Celts. Yeah, they were there a long time, and they were good people. But they didn't know the Lord. They had mystery schools. They had druids who taught the truth, but not everybody learned and grasped. Not everybody's up to that stage of evolution where they could grasp and give up all the instinctual nature and just trust in the Lord to be filled with the Holy Spirit. And when somebody did, they were considered a father, an elder, and people respected them in those days. And they built Avalon, and they had schools, but of course somebody was on their tail trying to wipe out the Celts. It was the Vikings. Yeah, the Vikings who left from Sidon and went to Sweden. They took over Sweden. Now, when Caesar in about 50 BC was warring with these Gauls, history doesn't make it very plain who he was really fighting. But what he was fighting was a group of people that were trying to come down from Sweden, from the Norwegian, from Denmark, where they had gone about, they will tell you, they got there around 700 BC or 600 BC. Well, that's that captivity of Israel, that were the Scythians, they were taken to Nineveh, went over the Caucasus Mountains, and they came over and they went in, and there's another wave of Israelites, not all from Dan, okay? But then there was an individual group of people that was there from Dan that became known as the Vikings, that had their boats, because Dan was on boats, right? He was on the seacoast of Sidon. And so he sailed to different places like Lundan and the Danube, up the rivers, the Danube River and the Dniester and Dan's Mark. And he made there was a little area in Sweden where these Vikings made their capital. And so they would have waves of attacks. They would come down from the north, and they were going all the way into Gaul, and they were trying to take over the empire, which at that time was good, ruled over by a czar from the line of Judah, who had gone to the mystery schools, who like Alexander the Great was an adept and was trying to understand, and all they knew, like King David, was we got to kill the bad guys and capture the Ark of the Covenant and build a house for the Lord, and because he was given a promise that one from his seed will come, and they wanted to make sure that when that one came, Jesus, that he would come to a people that were ready, that had schools and mysteries, and they were poor, they'd given up all their wealth and were seeking the one, like John the Baptist and the Essenes were seeking those in the mystery schools. And Caesar was in the mystery schools too. But he was king now. What's he going to do? Let these Vikings coming down from the north murder all the people and rape them and pillage? That's what they were believing in. They had been possessed of Satan from Mount Hermon, from the Nephilim, from the giants. The Rephaim had taken them over and had begun using them as a way, because, the devil knows the future too. He's read the stars. He knows a lot more about these prophecies than you and I. And he knew that the one who was destined, was written in the star, was going to be born there at Bethlehem. And he knew who his father was. And he understood that the Zara line came from Judah and was there in Rome. And they had an empire. This was the higher priesthood, not the one Judean down there, they were slaving like Martha, doing all the dishes and doing all the work in the house of Simon the Pharisee, right? But no. This was the other person, not the wicked high priest who had 5 brothers, who, when he dies, goes to hell because he's got karma and he's evil and he's done bad things. But no, this was Lazarus, Osiris, who, when he died, went to paradise. And Jesus went down there and said, come on out, brother. You got more work to do because you've given up everything. You've got treasures in heaven, but we've got more work for you to do because you were the one who was destined. Alexander the Great didn't quite do it, but he knew that one would come from his loins. King David didn't quite do it, but he knew that, he had blood on his hands, but he knew that one would come from his loins. And so Caesar came along, and he was slaving away, going up there fighting the Vikings, right? These were hordes of individuals. They call them the Helvetii. He had these numerous wars with the Helvetii. He had a couple other wars with, once with a Persian king or something, and another one with Pompey or whatever. But he was trying, because there were people trying to disturb the kingdom, and he was only worried about preserving the libraries and the mystery schools so that mankind would still have these mysteries. He had a good heart. He thought that maybe if he used the actual sword, like Peter, who went and cut the Roman soldier's ear off. They didn't know any better, but they were good. They were valiant. They were heroes. Caesar was a hero. He didn't go out and just murder people willy-nilly. No, when he came down and he crossed the Rubicon, that Senate knew that he was coming to take their power. And that's why they murdered him, a righteous man. And I believe that Caesar had already given up all of his fighting and all of his wealth even before he died that day. If you go read the story, he was trying so desperately. Before he died, he had taken all the money that was supposed to go to all these senators, and he gave it to the people. And he built libraries, and they loved him. And they come to proclaim him king, just like they did. Yes, Jesus was proclaimed king, and they said, Hosanna. Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. And it wasn't the name of Yahweh. because the Masoretic scribes 1000 AD forged that name Yahweh there. That name is the Lord. And it was our Heavenly Father and Divine Mother. Jesus was made king. And this is why the high priest wanted to kill him. For blasphemy. For saying that we are all the children of the Lord. Because they knew that another line, a royal blood, a Roman, which was vile and evil to them because they weren't under the law. So their law condemned Jesus. Because Jesus married a woman that they claimed was a prostitute, but really was a high priestess from another priesthood up in Syria, from Zarephath. So, when Jesus came, he healed that breach. If there's a story about Judah had two sons, Zerah and Perez, and Zerah came out first, and his hand came out the womb, and they tied a little red ribbon around it, and then his hand pulled back in. And then, in the womb, these two were fighting, and the other one came out, Perez. So they said, okay, Perez is the firstborn, but no, they had proof that the one stuck his hand out, had the red ribbon, and when he came out with a red ribbon, and these are called the kings of the red hand up in Ireland. They made it all the way up to Ireland, and that's the line of Zerah, and that's Caesar. But, you see, don't think that these Khazars and czars of Russia and stuff like this is from Jesus. Because, you see, what happened was Octavius Augustus, forged some documents, claimed that he was in his will, and he took over the kingdom and declared himself the son of Caesar. But he wasn't. So he took the name Caesar. And these kings that are ruling the world today are from Augustus and all of these others. They're not from Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar's child was a woman who went to Pharisee, the king of Persia, and then had a child named Julia Urania Cleopatra, who went to Rome, where Jesus found her. And Jesus was the son of Cleopatra, Ptolemy the 15th, who, when he was born, a star fell from heaven, and every nation, China, Persia, Egypt, Babylon, all recorded the star, and the wise men came and took off their crowns and said, this is the one that was prophesied to come. And they started the entire history of the world, the calendar, the Julian calendar. Julius Caesar started a new calendar at his birth, 47 BC. That was when Jesus was born. And he went with his mother down into Egypt and fled from Herod and Octavia Augustus, who became and stole the name Caesar. And then Cleopatra sent him to India, and he learned all the mysteries, and he became an adept, and he traveled around with his stepfather, Caesar. But wait a minute. We've said that Caesar is Lazarus. Caesar died when Jesus was 3 or 4 years old. Well, I think 3 years old. Did Jesus then go and resurrect Caesar when he was 3 years old? That's not what it looks like in the story. It looks like Jesus was was ministering, and going down to Jerusalem, and he was gaining disciples and stuff, so he had to be over 30 years old when he resurrected Lazarus. So what's going on here? Well, if you look at the story, it says Mary and Martha both went to Jesus and said, Lord, thank you, we found you. Where were you? If you had been here, our father Lazarus wouldn't have died. This is not a story saying, oh, we're just walking along one day and, Lazarus died. Oh, let's go find Jesus over here. Because you see, it says that Mary and Martha lived in a city called Bethany. Well, Beth is house, and Ani is the house of On. So where is the house of On? That's where Joseph went down when he went down into Egypt and married the daughter of Queen On, or the city of Heliopolis, or the city of Ra, which was later called at one point was called the city of On. And that is where the lineal descendants of Anu, or the grand deity, the father of the deities, was. The house of On. So Mary and Martha, their house, you see, was in Egypt around the Great Pyramid, or Heliopolis. And so that is where Jesus went to the Bethany, right? He went there, and, you know, Osiris was entombed in this Great Pyramid. It's symbolic, you see. He did die. Yes, he did. And there was a tomb in there, and they laid him in there, and he died, and his bones were in there. But if you go to Egypt today, you'll find there's nothing in that tomb. He rose. He came out. Jesus wasn't there. Jesus was in India learning all the ways of these mysteries and all, you know, getting wisdom. And when he came back, he had the power to raise the dead. And he said, Lazarus, he said, roll the stone away. And they rolled it away, and Caesar came out. Oh, man, he'd been in there a while. Well, the story says he was in there for 4 days. Well, now, what could that mean? 4 days. So let's go to John 11:17, where it mentions he was in that tomb for 4 days. And it says, having come, therefore, Jesus found him 4 already days, having been in the tomb. Okay. So what is this word 4, 5064? What does it mean? Oh, 4. Well, that's what we thought, right? 4. Hold on. Tessaris, 4, which sometimes also symbolizes universality, total, coverage, inclusion. So when it says 4 days, we're talking about a story here. It's trying to tell you a greater story. Perhaps he died for 4 days. Perhaps it was the only way that the writer of this particular gospel, John, who is also Lazarus himself, could get across to you the deeper meaning of the story, that Lazarus, the grand king of this world, who had all the wealth, was this great ruler. He had not been the king for a total period of time. All the time since Adam and Eve initiated us all into this wicked world. And all that time that has come down to now, you know, Cain's been ruling. But on that day, after it was all finished and complete, he rose. Friends, that's the meaning of that. Now, let me read you something as briefly as I can. This is important that we understand this. I want to read you in the Britannica their words to describe the story of Osiris and Horus. And it goes like this. They say Osiris, also called Usur, one of the most important deities of ancient Egypt. The origin of Osiris is obscure. He was a local deity of Busiris in Lower Egypt, and may have been a personification of chthonic or underworld fertility. By about 2400 BC, however, Osiris clearly played a double role. He was both a deity of fertility and the embodiment of the dead and a resurrected king. Okay, understand these words. It sounds like, oh, the dead, that's not Jesus. That's not Caesar. Well, Caesar died, didn't he? Okay, this is a man who dies and ends up coming back to life and winning, right? Because Set killed him. Now let's continue. He's a resurrected king. This dual role was in turn combined with the Egyptian concept of divine kingship. Kingship? The king at death became Osiris, deity of the underworld. And the dead king's son, the living king, Jesus, was identified with Horus, who was born on the horizon, the deity of the sky. Osiris and Horus were thus father and son. The deity Isis was the mother of the king. Cleopatra was considered the reincarnation of Isis. She was the mother of the king Jesus and was thus the mother of Horus and consort, or the wife of Osiris or Caesar. Caesar. The deity Seth, in Greek it's Saturn, and they would put the ending on Set, the on at the end, like Jisu, sometimes Jisun, or Jesus. Well, the ending is on. So Seton, Satan in Greek, is just Seth. That's the name, Set. And Set was considered the murderer of Osiris and the adversary. He was the adversary, my friends, that's the devil, of Horus. According to the form of the myth reported by the Greek author Plutarch, Osiris was slain or drowned by Seth, who tore the corpse into 14 pieces and flung them over Egypt. Eventually, Isis and her sister Nephthys. Isis had a sister named Nephthys. Found and buried all the pieces except the phallus. Remember, Lazarus had two sisters, Mary and Martha. Well, this is Isis and Nephthys. Found and buried all the pieces except the phallus, thereby giving new life to Osiris. And this is what happened with Cleopatra. We told the story yesterday. Who thenceforth remained in the underworld as ruler and judge. His son Horus successfully fought against Seth, avenging Osiris and becoming the new king of Egypt. Osiris was not only the ruler of the dead, but also the power that granted all life from the underworld, from the sprouting vegetation to the annual flood of the Nile River. From about 2000 BC onward, it was believed that every man, not just the deceased kings, became associated with Osiris at death. This identification with Osiris, however, did not imply resurrection. However, for even Osiris did not rise from the dead. Instead, it signified a renewal of life, both in the next world and through one's descendants on earth, in his own son. In this universalized form, Osiris's cult spread throughout Egypt, often joining with the cults. Now, they're using the word cult, okay? And that's taken on a bad name, but these are the mystery schools of local fertility and underworld deities. The idea that rebirth in the next life could be gained by following Osiris was maintained through certain cult forms. In the Middle Kingdom, the deities' festivals consisted of processions and nocturnal rites and were celebrated at the Temple of Abydos, where Osiris was assimilated, the very ancient deity of the dead, Kinti-Imintiu. This name, meaning foremost of the Westerners, was adopted by Osiris as an epithet. Because the festival took place in the open, public participation was permitted, and by the early 2nd millennial BC, it had become fashionable to be buried along with the professional road at Abydos, or to erect a cenotaph as a representative of the dead. Osiris's festivals, symbolically reenacting the deity's fate, were celebrated annually in various towns throughout Egypt. A central feature of the festivals during the later period was the construction of the Osiris Garden, a mold in the shape of Osiris filled with soil. The mold was moistened with the water of the Nile and sown with grain. Later, the sprouting grain symbolized the vital strength of Osiris. At Memphis, the holy bull Apis was linked with Osiris, becoming Osiris's Apis, which eventually became the name of the Hellenistic deity Serapis. You've heard of Serapis Christ. I did a video about that. That was Osiris, who was also the great anointed king, just like Jesus was a Christ, just like David was an anointed or a Christ. This just means the anointed king. Serapis means a serpent. And it's interesting because Apis also means a bull. But seraph is a serpent. And there are two serpents. The Bible calls them seraphim, that are around the throne. There are two serpents, each with 6 wings. That makes the 12 houses of the zodiac. And these two serpents is the two serpents that guided the way to the tree of life in the garden, in the Sumerian tablets, and in the Bible. One of the serpents we find in the garden in Genesis, but we don't realize there's another one there. You don't realize it because serpents aren't things that slide on their belly. That one serpent was cursed to slide on his belly. The other one had wings. Okay, because remember, Yahweh cursed him to slide upon his belly. Well, Greco-Roman authors connected, well, it's called a dragon, connected Osiris with the deity Dionysius. Oh, okay. That's what we were saying. Osiris was also identified with Soker and an ancient Memphite deity of the dead. The oldest known depictions of Osiris dates to about 2300 BC, but representations of him are rare before the New Kingdom. When he was shown in an archizing form as a mummy with his arms crossed on his breast, one hand holding a crook, the other a flail. On his head was this Atif crown composed of the white crown of Upper Egypt and two ostrich feathers. You see, Upper Egypt was really the southern part of Egypt, and Lower Egypt was really the northern part of Egypt. So when he was in Lower Egypt, he ruled over that. That's actually the northern part of Egypt, which is where Abraham ruled in Goshen. But he eventually became the deity of Upper Egypt, which is the southern part of Egypt, because he conquered death. Now, here's Set, and I want you to see this. Set, also called Sitek or Sitesh or Set, ancient Egyptian deity, patron of the 11th nome or province of Upper Egypt. The worship of Set originally centered at Nubit, Greek Ombos, near the present-day Tuk, on the western bank of the Nile River. Nubit, was, with its vast symmetry and nearby Nakada, was a principal pre-dynastic center in Upper Egypt. The town lost its preeminent position with the unification of Egypt about 30,050 BC, which is carried out under kings whose capital was Abydos and whose royal deity was Horus. Set was represented as a composite figure with a canine body. Okay, that's a wolf, right, that comes after the sheep. Slanting eyes, square-tipped ears, tufted later representations, forked tail, and a long, curved, pointy snout. Various animals, including aardvarks, antelopes, asses, camels. By the way, we showed in another video that the individuals like Plutarch and Pliny admitted that Yahweh's animal was a jackal or an ass, a donkey. And Jesus came riding into Jerusalem on an ass, showing his dominance over this particular deity. So, Set is also Satan, which is the one who killed Osiris. So he's the devil, and that's Yahweh that murdered Jesus and Osiris through the law. A greyhound, a jackal, a jerboa, a long-snouted mouse, okapi, an oryx, and a pig. Sometimes it was most of the time it was a dog or like I say, a jackal or a donkey, ass, or a pig. And this is very interesting. You know, remember Christ sent the evil spirits into pigs and they went off into the abyss because that's the home of this deity in hell. Originally, Seth was a sky deity, lord of the desert, master of storms, disorder, and warfare. In general, a trickster. Well, you see, Yahweh was on his mountain. He was a storm deity out in the desert, a liar, an adversary. It's all, no question, we're talking about Yahweh, who was the one who enjoyed and took pleasure, as it says in Isaiah 53, he took pleasure in bruising Jesus and killing him. So, Seth embodied the necessary and creative element of violence and disorder within the ordered world. Right? The ordered natural world is just wonderful. But law, arbitrary law, is what makes disorder in the world. And it's what makes shame and guilt and sin and death. The vicissitudes of his cult reflect the ambivalent attitude of the Egyptian toward him, as well as the shifting political fortunes of Egypt. During the second dynasty, King Peribisin identified himself with Set for the first time, giving himself Set title instead of the traditional Horus name, his successor. Kashakimwai gave both Horus and Seth equal prominence in his titulary, reflecting the mythical resolution of the two deities. During the rule of Hyksos invaders, Set was worshipped at their capital. Yeah, they worshiped Yahweh down there, and they gave him the Ten Commandments. Avarice in the northeastern Nile River Delta was identified with the Canaanite storm deity Baal. Now you know why Elihu didn't like Baal. We said Baal is Hadad or Hades, or the storm deity, and who, by the way, was the same religion deity in that area called the Temple of Dagon, which is the mitre that the Pope wears. Now, where did he get that? Well, not from Christ, I guarantee it. Okay, that happened after the apostasy in 395-400 when the Goths came down, these Vikings. Who were they? They came from Sudan. And this is this area in Syria that worshipped at the temple at Baalbek, which they, commandeered because that was originally the temple of Dionysius or Bacchus that turned the water into wine. But they rebuilt it with their giants in this huge megalithic stones called Baalbek. This is where Elihu and Elisha went up there and had it out with them and proved they were not the true deity, that they were liars. So Baal is the same as Dagon, which is the Nordic, Norse, Swedish descendants of Dan who had the Serpent's Trail that came on ships and went to Sudan, came down in around 50 BC when Caesar was king, and he came and he went and he defeated them. And he kept the empire of the mystery schools and the truth and the true libraries and education and the prosperity and the roads and all that was going to give mankind higher education. He preserved it and carried it down because he loved human beings until Jesus came along and said, Dad, I went to the schools that you sent me, and I found that we've got one problem. We've got to give up this world. And those who want the true kingdom will follow us. It's a spiritual kingdom, Daddy. And Caesar gave up all of his wealth. And probably because he was also a student, an adept of the mysteries. And he became one who not only gave up all of his wealth, but conquered death. So the Pope started donning this Dagon mitre from Dan's tribe, from the Svedans, and from the Denmark, and from the Danube, and the London. Yes, London was originally inhabited by Celts, Druids, and they were good people. But, when Dan, one of the tribes of Israel, who was similar, there are a lot of similarities, kind of the same kind of ideas, but they believed they had this Judaism and all the law and the harshness and the Celts were like loggers, and woodsmen. But the Vikings were on ships and they were brutal and they had weapons and they killed people and they would go in and just take out cities and brutally massacre them to take out the knowledge of the mysteries in the schools and the roads and the libraries. And this is why Caesar fought them on the battle. This is why David fought the Philistines. Okay, until they realized and they got that great revelation. So, during the New Kingdom, Set was esteemed as a martial deity who could sow discord among the Egyptian enemies. The Ramesside pharaohs, originating in the northeastern delta, ranked him among the great deities of Egypt, used his name in their personal names, Seti or Seti II, Setnacht, and promoted the image of Set in the protector of Re, in the prow of his bark, slaying Re's enemy, Apophis. Set also joined Ammon, Re, and Ptah as the fourth of the principal deities of the cosmos. Okay, for a while he gained prominence because Yahweh got to the top of the mountain and said, I am God and there is none else. But look what happens. In the myths, Set was the brother of Osiris. There too, his character was troublesome, for he was depicted as a bursting out of the womb of his mother Nut, being an unfaithful husband to his consort and sister Nephites. Remember Martha and her husband? And he was a Pharisee, and he made Martha work and cook and clean. But Jesus' wife, she was free. Well, you see, he didn't treat Martha right. And so Martha went with her sister Mary. and they helped him resurrect their brother Lazarus because he got angry and killed him. Being an unfaithful husband to his consort, he was unfaithful to Martha. You know, these Judeans, they could have as many women as they wanted. They bought and sold them like flies. They were prostitutes to them. And he murdered Osiris, whom he tricked into entering a chest. Guess where that chest is? We don't have time to go through all the histories and all the different things, but Osiris was put in the room with the king's chamber, and they rolled the stone over it, and he was entombed in the Great Pyramid. Yes, he was. It was real. This is a story that actually happened. And his wife, she loved him, and she found a way, even though the darkness sometimes overcomes the light. You know, nighttime comes, but you know what? Morning will come too. Don't you worry. We're all going to succeed. Rebirth, fertility, it will happen. The sun will come up in the morning, and we're going to conquer the darkness, and we're going to be transformed from glory unto glory, even as is done by the Lord. Well, he closed, and he hurled it into the river to be carried out to the sea. Well, the Nile River rose, and it was sunk in the river when he caused this great flood. And after Osiris's murder, Horus was conceived miraculously by Isis, by Cleopatra. You know, Caesar died, and yet there was this child, but it wasn't from Caesar. But it was Caesar's child, because how did that happen? Well, the wife and sister of Osiris, Horus, struggled with Set, who sought to dispossess him from his father's throne. This struggle forms the theme of the Ramesside text, the contending of Horus and Set, which borders on satire, and the latter much more somber version recorded by Plutarch, in which Set is embodiment of the Greek demon Typhon. Set is Typhon. Typhon is the destroyer. You know, you see a typhoon coming, it's a storm. Well, Typhon is also, we've shown this in other videos, the same as Apollyon, Apollos, or Apulu in the Sumerian. And it's the one that has the key to the bottomless pit that's talked about in Revelation chapter 9, who's also called Abaddon. Abi, Father, Adonai, Yahweh. After the close of the New Kingdom, as Egypt lost its empire and later its independence, and as the cult of Osiris grew in prominence, Set was gradually ousted from the Egyptian pantheon. Yay! Cleopatra defeated Augustus Caesar. Yes, she did. And Dan. And her husband and her son, Horus, or Jesus, they defeated the darkness. And they ousted Set from Egypt. In the first millennium, his name and image were effaced from many monuments. He was now identified as a deity of the eastern invaders of Egypt. Yeah, they were invaders. Moses was. Including the Persians. No longer able to reconcile Set with Horus. You know, you can't worship them both, because one is darkness and one is light. There's a difference. You can't reconcile the two. You can't just worship any deity you want. The Egyptians equated, see if you read history and the ancient esoteric wisdom from the temple walls and from all the mystery cults, as they call them, who were stewards of the great secrets handed down to man from the angels' hands. So, Egyptians equated the former with evil, and the demon Apopis or Apollos is the destroyer, or with the Greek Typhon, elaborate rituals of the repeated defeat of Set as the enemy largely replaced the earlier ritual destructions of Apopis. So, what we're saying here is that the story that we have in the Bible is the actual occurrence. And the reason the Bible is written in that way that it's written is to help us understand that this was all prophesied, not just like when you look at the Old Testament, you see some allusion to Christ in the writings of David. Well, I mean, it doesn't say in the Psalms, and the man's name will be Jesus, and he'll die in 3 days, and it's all like the whole story. That's not what prophecy is. It's illusions. Something happened to David that sort of mimicked or was a type or a shadow of what would eventually happen to Jesus, who was the one who's to come, who fulfilled the prophecies. And so it's Jesus who fulfilled this of Horus. It was Caesar who fulfilled this about Osiris. And it was Judas who fulfilled this about Set. Anyway, guys, I guess we're going to have to close it here because we're so far over an hour. And we got to wrap it up. I'll be back here tomorrow, and I hope you guys will too. May the Lord bless you. See you then.